So, of course, literally 30 minutes or so, or an hour after I cut the Lazar Gotcha's video, I stumble across this new article, which was released today. It goes through the inconsistencies of Bob's story. Something that Lazar stands often tout as adding credibility to his claims is the idea that he's been remarkably consistent from year to year to year. Now, we've been telling this story, or he's been telling it for 32 years, so it's not out of the question for there to be some minor inconsistencies or things he gets mixed up about between interview to interview. That would be normal, but as this article will show, and which I will quickly run through, it actually changed. It's all over the place, and in my mind, there's just I guess in my mind is going to be like my catchphrase. There are aspects of the inconsistencies that completely blow up a big part of the story. So I want to get into that and spend a few minutes running through it. So let's see. First things first. Bob was not into UFOs before he told his story or before this all happened. There's considerable evidence to the contrary. As is outlined here, Bob kind of fiddles between saying he has no interest and then saying, he met John Lear and then had some interest and had some materials. So depending on when he was asked early on, his answer in his interest in UFOs ranged from no interest at all, don't care about them, to, yeah, pretty interested, got some shit from John, some materials or videos or magazines or books. So that, in my mind, says a lot. Moving right along, what's the next one that I want to actually bring up here? Memory tampering. Oh yeah, this story. So one of Bob's stories is that he basically claims he was drugged or that they tampered with his memory to help him forget a lot of the things that he saw. So let's see. In this first case, he says memory was affected by use of drugs and hypnosis. On occasion, he was given a glass of yellow liquid that smelled like pine, claims to have been hypnotized. And then all of these sources for all of these are linked in the article, which is absolutely great. I've already put it in the description of my last video. So then 3 years later, I had to drink a glass of yellow liquid that smelled like pine. They hypnotized me, never found out why. Then 95, they ask him, what do you mean they messed with your memory? That stuff you drank? And he says, I don't think so. So now he's walking that back. So for almost 5 years, he claims that he was drugged and hypnotized. And then in 95, when they ask him about it, he says, no, that didn't happen. I mean, in theory, if he was drugged, sure, he might not remember it, but him flip-flopping on this definitely isn't a good look. Let's see, so autopsy photos. In 1990, he claims to have seen autopsy reports as well as black and white photos of alien bodies, typical grays, and some photos of various organisms. 2019, in my briefing, it did have to do with, as far as the actual beings that were in the craft, they had a photograph of them and where their chest was cut and peeled back and they had made notes of. It was only one central organ, as if all the organs had grown together. So in 1990, he implies that there's an autopsy and there's a whole pile of organs. 1990, he's claiming that's not the case. This is not the best one in my opinion, but it's still something. Information exchange is, I'll go over this quick. In some interviews, he claims that the government was in contact with these aliens and that they were trading information between our species and theirs. And then in another interview, he says he doesn't know or that it doesn't happen. Here's where it gets to the meat and potatoes, okay? So one of the big parts of Bob's story about the UFO itself was he claims that there were things on the bottom, like gravity motors or gravity amplifiers, that make the whole thing work. He claims there's multiple configurations for them, and he calls it like the Omicron and Delta. Yeah, there it is. Omicron and Delta. And that depending on how they're angled and configured, it determines how the craft flies or how fast it goes. So when he's asked how many gravity amplifiers are used in the Omicron configuration, and again, he claims to have discovered this. So this is something he should not waver on at all. 1989, 3. 1990 or 1989, a bit later. What does he say? Really wish I remember what they call, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? 1994, 1. 2019, 1. 2019 later, 2. So this is like asking how many wheels are on a car. And the first time you say 3, the next time you say 1, the next time you say 2. If you really worked on this, you would remember how many gravity amplifiers are sticking out of the bottom of this thing. That's not something you're going to fucking forget over the course of 10, 20, 30 years. Are the gravity amplifiers always powered on? 1990. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but they always run at 100%. They're always outputting a maximum gravity, and wave is phase shifted from 0 to 180 degrees. In 91, on the tape that he sold for money, because again, he didn't monetize his story, right? He basically says that no, they're not always on. It depends on the configuration, the gravity A wave, the gravity B wave. My older brother always cracks jokes about the A and B wave because it sounds really fancy to us plebes who didn't study physics or advanced math, but apparently if you know what you're talking about, it's just laughably bad. On to element 115, which again, he claims to have figured out. We'll get to that in a second. Is it bombarded by protons? No. And then probably, I'm going to guess, yes. So he directly contradicts himself on the thing that he claims to have specifically discovered himself on his project, i.e. his biggest contribution to the product. Not something I would think you could mix up, despite there being time, but this was in the same year. One interview it did, in the other interview it did not. Bob has said that his main contribution to the project at S4 was identifying what element was used to power the reactor. However, he immediately acknowledges he did not identify which element it was. So, 1993, Bob. I was the one who identified element 115. That was my only contribution to the contribution to the project. I don't stand on the fact that it's 115, but if it's not, it's 114. I don't know a lot about chemistry. I'm guessing that's just not how this shit works, but maybe someone smarter than me can clarify that. Then later, he says it's unequivocally element 115. Then he later claims that he didn't do any spectrographic analysis on it, which how would you know what it was if you didn't? I mean, I think that's very, very basic when it comes to identifying these things. Then a physicist friend asked Bob, how did you determine it? Did you put it in a mass spectrograph? How did you figure out what it was? Kind of question Bob never wants to answer. Well, there are many different ways, but certainly a mass spectrograph was one way. So again, here, didn't have any spectrographic analysis. Here, that was one way. We did all kinds of bizarre things. Los Alamos was apparently involved in some of the analysis. I don't know if they knew what they were doing. Yeah, because, Bob is going to be such a better physicist than anyone over at measly-ass Los Alamos. Where did the crafts originate from? In 89? I don't know. They're in good condition. 1990? Don't know where we got them from or how long ago it was, blah, blah, blah. There's a hole in it, so they're no longer in good condition. Now there's a hole in it, and now they're cracked or fucked up. 1993, there's 9 in all. Each one's different. 3 had been taken apart. 1 was damaged. 1 crashed. Mid-90s, how do these crafts get into the hands of the government? I have no idea how they got there. I don't believe there were crashes. Again, this is not something you would mix up or forget. If you read that some of these were from crashes and you saw the crash damage, you wouldn't later on say, no, I don't remember how we got them. I don't remember there being any damage. I don't think they crashed. That's like the wheels on the car or the number of gravity amplifiers. You wouldn't make that mistake if you were telling a true, consistent, objective story that you're recalling from actual memory. To me, this shit is really damning. Maybe even as damning as the entirety of my other video, in a much more condensed fashion. 2015. As far as you can tell, they don't look like they've been in a crash, right? Now, this is an assumptive question, to be fair. But, well, there's one, and like I mentioned a long time ago, I never added this one thing. There was one, like I said, that had been shot, one that came out of the water that he knows for a fact, which, okay, how does he know that now when he didn't before? You know for a fact because that's what you were told. Yeah. I mean, dude, the jig is up right here, okay? If you still believe Lazar after seeing the last video or this one, and this information, which again, sources and documentation is provided in both cases, I have 115 bridges to sell you. I really do. What else do we got here? So again, it's more crash, didn't crash. Okay. Where is the material from the craft from, or what material was it made from? In 90s, it was obviously metal. 90, we can make an alloy like that. 90, also, metal was bent upwards and looked like it was shot. 2019, for example, I learned that the bulk of the craft was manufactured from the same material. Tests had shown that it was not metallic in origin, nor was it ceramic. Okay, so it's not metal. It was certainly metal. It was obviously metal. It's an alloy we can make. Nope, it's not either of those. Okay, another one that you would not fuck up if you were telling a true story. How big is the spaceship? How big is the UFO? 30 or 35 feet. Later that year, 35 to 40 feet, 15 feet high. 3 years later, 40 feet wide, 15 feet tall. 1996, 52.8 feet in diameter. That's interesting. That's very specific. Almost as if he's trying to make it look more believable. 2019, from what I could discern, it was approximately 50 feet or so in diameter, and it was roughly 20 feet tall. So we went from 35 by 15 to 50 by 20. And or 52.8, 121 gigawatts. Was there writing in the craft? 89. Nope. 89 again. Not on the controls or anything, but I did see some evidence of writing. Okay. After the panel had been transparent for a while, a form of writing, which was unlike anything I've ever seen, began to appear. Okay. How much time did you spend at S4? Spent no more than 6 or 7 days total. In his book, at least 9 days. And implies that it was a lot more. This has always been a problem in his story, that he didn't work, no matter which version you listen to, he didn't work there very long. And he didn't work there long enough to do all the things he said he did. If it was 10 days, he discovered element 115, he measured the sport model, made those propulsion breakthroughs, understanding the gravity waves, all that in 10 days. And not even back-to-back days, according to him. So the security clearance, which we talked about in the last video, he can't have. He was bankrupt and or a felon. 1990, I was never officially fired and my clearance was never taken away. 1990, it turns out that's why I never had my clearance. This right here, again, in the same year, in one interview, he's saying that he never got his clearance. And then in a different interview, he's saying that his clearance is still valid. So he not only got one, but that it's still valid. In 93, he says he was in fact given a clearance and then later learned that his clearance had ended negative and he would need to reapply later. That's not how it works. I looked into being in the Air Force at one point, learned a little bit about how clearances work. It does not work like that. Obviously, I ruled against that decision, but it was something that came up in the recruiting process. In 2019, Lazar says of his clearance after the interview with George Knapp, I damaged my chances at getting the clearance that I needed to work at S4. So again, now he's saying he never had one. Which one was it? This is not something you would fuck up if you were telling a true story. So again, in summary, fantastic article, very clearly written, very, very clearly points out the inconsistencies in the story. So I would thank you to SignalsIntelligence, my man, or my lady, doing the Lord's work here. And just wanted to add this because even though it came out today unexpectedly, I would consider it to be almost as important as everything else I talked about in the last video. So, yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Pretty bad look for Bob that this exists. But, yeah, rock and roll will never die, baby. Have a good one.